In this video we're going to look at rigging models. This is where we make a skeleton and attach it to the mesh so that when we move the bones of the skeleton the model deforms and animates. In Blender a skeleton is actually called an armature. This relates to the armatures that are used in some traditional animation, particularly stop motion. And it's basically a metal skeleton that sits inside your model and allows you to bend it and move it without kind of breaking the model. So this is going to be a very simple armature that we create and should allow us to move it quite well, but not fully realistically. Obviously to do fingers and things like that you need a lot more bones, whereas in this case we've got very simple hands, so we can get away with fewer bones and give it bones in the right places to make it move in the way that you want. To begin, I'm going to switch my view mode so that I'm looking at my character straight on. So I press the X button here in the top right on this gizmo, and that's put me in this view here. Then I'm going to press this button here, which switches it from perspective, where we can see shadow and depth, to orthographic, where that depth is taken away and we get a very flat view. This is really helpful for us to put the armature in. Using the 3D cursor here on the left, I can click where I want my first bone to appear. I'm going to click here right in the middle of the mesh, so roughly equidistant from either side, and I'm putting it where I imagine the sort of base of the spine to be, so somewhere around here just above the hip. This is going to be a good starting point for my bones. You should try and work out where your bones should go, but starting with the bottom of the spine, whatever your character looks like, is a good idea. With our cursor here, I'm going to switch back to selection mode, and at the top I'm going to choose Add Armature. You can see that it has added this bone here, and we can do some initial preparations if we need to. We can move this just like we would any other object, and of course we can rotate it, so R and then X, and I can rotate it perhaps if my character has a bent spine or something like that, or it needs to be in a particular direction. But the idea is obviously treat it like a normal object and position it where you need it to be. Once you've got the first bone in position, we can go into edit mode, so you can press tab or choose edit mode from this list, and we can actually select different parts of the bone. These little balls which represent the joints, the bone, and then there's another little ball at the top here. It's a bit difficult to see, so I'll zoom in. As usual, when it's selected it's highlighted in orange, and if I now press G and Z I can move that up and down. Now normally with the spine you have quite a few vertebrae, but that would probably be too detailed for this character, so I'm just going to go up here to add more bones. I'm going to press E and then Z and just go up like this, E then Z. So I've sort of come to the shoulders there, just there. This one sort of underneath the arms, just panning upwards a little bit, so holding shift and scrolling upwards or moving it upwards. I'm going to press E, this one, and then Z. This one's going to go up to the base of the head, so this is the neck bone. For the head here I'm going to press E and then Z. I'm pressing Z so that the bone doesn't go off in all sorts of directions. It can sometimes be that if you press E you can sort of move it in different directions like that and sort of lose track of where you are. Sometimes it will move in the X-axis as well, so you might find that this armature is actually zigzagged when we look at it from the side. I'll undo that last bone, we don't need that. So I've left this one coming out the top of the head like that. It just makes it a little easier to grab when we're animating it. For the arms, I'm going to choose the joint that's most appropriate, this one here, and I'm going to do a little bone. So I'm going to press E, and that comes off there. I'm doing that down to the armpit there. Then I want one down to the elbow, so E, down to the elbow. Now I haven't pressed a particular axis, though I should probably press Y and just trap it in that Y axis so that I'm not moving it back and forth without realizing. E and Y down to the wrist, E and Y down to the hand like that. If you need to move one, if you set one in place and you need to move it, just press G and you can move it around just like you would with any sort of vertex or edge or face with normal objects. So I've got one halfway down the hand there, E and Y, and then just out through the fingers like that. I'm going to try and duplicate that on the other side just by eye. It's a simple mesh, so I'm not going to worry about mirroring it or anything. Like that. E down to the elbow, try and get them roughly the same. E down to the wrist, and then finally through the fingers. There we go. If I just turn this model for a moment and have a little look, we can see that actually, you know, they've all been going in pretty straight lines. They're not quite sitting in the mesh, but we can solve that once we've made the legs. I'll just pop back into that particular view, and this time we're going to look at the legs. Basically the same process. I've selected that little joint at the end of the spine, or the bottom of the spine, E, and this time I'm just going to move it out to the sort of top of the leg, so maybe somewhere here. E down to the knee, and then E down to the foot. We are actually going to add some more bones in a different view, which will give us more control over the foot and the head. So I'm just going to duplicate this on the other side. E to make that kind of hip bone, E down to the knee, and down into the foot there. You can always adjust these later if you need to. So from this view, I've got my armature in place. However, I need to make sure that it works from the side view as well. And as I say, add a couple more bones in for things that we can't see from this direction quite so well. So to flip to the side, I'm going to press Y, and there we go. And just to make this easier, I'm going to go into object mode and press G and then X to move this back so that it sits nicely in the middle of my mesh. There's a problem here in that we now can't see the bones. To solve this, obviously you could go into wireframe mode and we can see that there, but often we want to work in solid mode or maybe even rendered mode. We choose the armature. You can see I've got mine highlighted in orange here, and down here on the right we choose this little armature tab, and if you scroll down to the viewport display, if it's closed you can open it up like that, and here we can tick this box that says in front, and the result of that is that whilst the bones are inside the mesh, actually we're able to see them with this mode ticked. So that's very helpful. It means that we can now go back into edit mode and just add a couple more things in. So for example here at the bottom of the leg, I can press E and make it one that comes out the front of the foot like that. I also like to make one that just comes out to the heel like that. I think it tends to just deform a little better. Obviously we've only just done one leg here, we'll go to the other side in a moment. The head, while we're here, I'm just going to press G and move that something like that, and then E, and just kind of come out the front of the face like that. This allows us to kind of nod the head and shake the head as well, and although it's very simple, tends to work reasonably well. Now for the other leg, I will come over here to this gizmo, and if I press on that Y again, it should flip me around to the other side. I'm going to choose this joint at the end of the leg again. Do be careful that you're not accidentally selecting the one behind it. You can kind of see that's just out of view there. If you want to make doubly sure, you can just turn out of that view and then go back to it, and again just press E down like that, and then select that joint again and press E and come down like that. As I say, this is a pretty simple mesh, and so I suppose I could add thumbs in which case I could go into the top view, and at a useful point I suppose maybe I should move that. If I press G and then Y, I can move that back a little bit, and then just press E out to where the thumb meets the hand, and then E once more out of the thumb. That would allow me to bend that. obviously do the same the other side. Click in there. I need to move that back a little, something like that. And then E out to where the thumb meets the hand, and then E out of the end of the thumb. Okay, so that's all the bones, and I'm going to pop back to my 3D view and just rotate it around a little so I can see what I'm doing. As you can see, it's focusing on that bone at the moment, which is making it a little hard to move. So if you ever need to, you can go to View and choose Frame All, just to kind of reset your camera. Okay, I can have a little look around this, and our goal is to try and put these bones, or make sure these bones are well within the mesh, not too close to edges or sort of biased to one side or the other. So perhaps with these thumb bones, I can select that one. If I press G and Z, I can just sort of move that down a little bit to help it sit within the mesh a little better. And this one as well, G and then Z, like that. We could obviously give a little shape to the bone, so maybe, you know, you can see there's a little bit of a bend to the leg here. So I could take perhaps the knees here and just press G and X and just push them forward slightly to try and replicate that kind of shape. You can obviously move your bones to fit nicely within your character, but I'm going to say I'm happy with that. So I'll go into object mode, and this is where we're able to select our mesh and our armature and combine the two. Before we add the armature, make sure that your mesh has no modifiers that haven't been applied. So here you can see the mirror modifier hasn't been applied. If I were to do the armature now, then only half of it would move. And in fact, if I just turn that off in the viewport, you'd see it'd be this half that moved, but it would actually mirror that movement in the other side. So we'd be very restricted in how our character could move. So what we have to do is press the apply button. Here with the subdivision surface, it's important that we have enough faces on our model for it to deform correctly. If I turn that off, here you can see I might just have enough edges. You can see I've got them at roughly where the joints are. So it might well work. However, it's probably a good idea, if you want your final character to look smooth, to apply that now. So I'll just turn that back on and press apply. With the modifiers applied, I now, with the mesh selected, I hold down the Shift key and click on the armature. With them both selected, I hold down the Control key and press P and choose Set Parent to Armature Deform with Automatic Weights. And that's that. It doesn't look like anything's happened, but we can see we've got Make Parent down here. And you'll also see up here, we've got Armature. And if I twirl that open, within that, it's got the cube. The cube is now, or the mesh here, the character, I should obviously name these things, is what's called a child of the armature. Wherever we move the armature, the cube must go with it. To make sure that our armature is going to deform our mesh correctly, we can go into pose mode. This allows us to select individual bones and then move them around, or rotate them is what you tend to do with bones. So if I press R then Z, you can see that now that deforms nicely. I'll try the other side, R and Z. There we go. If I choose these bones here and press R and Z, you can see I can turn the head, whereas if I press R and Y, I can nod the head. When you're positioning your character, when you animate it or pose it, it's a good idea to start from the kind of torso and work your way outwards, because if you start trying to put the hand in position and then you end up rotating this arm, suddenly that hand might not look as you intended. So work your way out. And then I can bend the hand as well. Okay, so it might take a bit of practice, but have a go with the bones, see how they work. Obviously save your file at a good point. I'm just going to undo those actions that I did. So, you know, when you've got it like this, save your file, have a little play with it, and you've always got that save file there to go back to if things go a little bit awry. In a later video, we'll have a look at animating this, but for now, have a little play around with these bones and just get used to how they work.